Hello. In the first episode, I gave an overview of some of the reasons that I think Hitler became Chancellor of Germany in January 1933. Now, in this episode, I want to talk about how the Nazis governed Germany from that moment up until the outbreak of war in September 1939. The first thing to say is that it's actually rather misleading to think that the Nazis were in power from the moment Hitler became Chancellor on the 30th of January. That's because while Hitler was certainly Chancellor in 1933, he was not head of state. President Hindenburg was, and he retained the power to sack the Chancellor whenever he felt like it. Although dismissing Hitler would have been politically fraught, since by early 1933 the Nazi Party was the largest in the Reichstag, Hitler didn't yet have unfettered power, and he knew Hindenburg was always receptive to listening to how the army felt about things, in particular what senior officers thought about their relationship with the leaders of the Nazi stormtroopers. Perhaps not surprisingly, large numbers of army officers looked down on the stormtroopers, considering them ignorant beer hall thugs. Given that background, it's understandable that one of the very first meetings that Hitler took on coming into office as Chancellor was with leading German military commanders. On the 3rd of February 1933, just 4 days after he became Chancellor, Hitler sought to reassure German generals about the role of the army in his new regime. He emphasized that it was vital for Germany to have a strong army and that he was committed to a vast program of rearmament. But what was really surprising was that he also raised the possibility at this meeting of using this army in years to come to acquire new territory for Germany, Lebensraum, or living space as he called it. This, in my view, was a hugely significant moment. Hitler had written in his autobiography Mein Kampf 9 years before that he thought Germany should try and gain land in the western part of the Soviet Union, that's today's Russia, so as to create this new empire. But the very same day that Hitler told his generals that he might order an invasion of the Soviet Union once Germany was strong enough, Hitler held a press conference for foreign journalists. And here he stated the exact opposite. He now hypocritically presented himself as desperate to preserve peace. Anyone like myself who knows what war is, said Hitler, is aware of what a squandering of effort, or rather consumption of strength, is involved. So here's the question. Why in private was he raising the possibility of a war of conquest with the army? I think, first of all, because the desire to have this war in the East was fundamental to his worldview. This was the track Germany under his leadership was always on. Don't forget that one of the few successes the German army had had in the First World War was their campaign in the East. While they'd been bogged down on the Western Front, in the East they had managed to do a hugely advantageous deal with Lenin in early 1918 at the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. And here they'd made Lenin give up an enormous amount of land and resources in the west of the newly communist state. Of course, all these gains were reversed in the various treaties signed after Germany lost the First World War. But German generals would have remembered well how they had previously prospered in Russia. While Hitler was meeting with his generals, Nazi stormtroopers were taking revenge on their political opponents. Concentration camps like Dachau outside Munich were created in which those considered enemies of the regime were imprisoned and brutally treated. Indeed, a number lost their lives. But while some of those who suffered were certainly German Jews, it's important to understand that this was not yet the Holocaust as we know it. Most people sent to concentration camps around this time were released after 18 months or so. And in persecuting those they considered their enemies, Hitler and the Nazis were immensely helped by an incident that happened on the 27th of February 1933. This was less than a month after Hitler became Chancellor. The burning of the German Parliament, the Reichstag in Berlin. This arson attack was almost certainly the action of one Dutch communist and not part of a broader conspiracy. But Hitler and his colleagues trumpeted that it was evidence of a vast communist plot, and the fire prompted President Hindenburg to sign a law immediately afterwards that massively restricted the human rights of all Germans. Significantly, many Germans accepted all this. They remembered the revolutions that had taken place in the immediate aftermath of the First World War, and how well the communists had done in the various elections in the 1930s. They feared violence and open warfare on the streets. One German woman who lived in Hamburg spoke for many when she wrote in her diary that she thought the Reichstag fire was to be just the beginning. She believed the communists wanted to take hostages of women and children, send murderous bands to the villages to start fires, use every weapons in the cities, from the most refined to the primitive, boiling water to poison. Like millions of other Germans, her fear of a communist uprising drove her towards greater support for the Nazis. People like her thought if it was necessary to restrict human rights in order to deal with the perils the country faced, then so be it. Shortly after the Reichstag fire, an enabling law was passed which allowed Hitler to govern without having to go through Parliament or President Hindenburg for every piece of legislation. Then, on April 1st, 1933, the Nazis organised a day-long boycott of Jewish shops and businesses. The Nazis pretended that their actions were in response to foreign protests, but actually, as we saw in the last episodes, the Nazis had long been committed to persecuting German Jews and wanted to restrict their ability to live and work in the country. The Nazis were motivated by intense anti-Semitic beliefs. They blamed the Jews for the loss of the First World War, for being behind the ideology they most despised, communism, for giving their loyalty not to the country in which they lived, but to Jews abroad, and so on. It was all lies, but the Nazis believed these conspiracy theories nonetheless. For German Jews, this boycott was a shocking experience, the moment when they realized that normal laws did not apply to them. And unfortunately, as we know, there was worse to come. It was against this background that by early 1934, Hitler faced a growing problem. Many of his stormtroopers, under the leadership of the buccaneering Ernst Röhm, weren't satisfied with the progress of the revolution. There were strong rumours that Röhm even wanted to make the stormtroopers the preeminent armed force in Germany. And Hitler, as we've seen, believed it was vital that the German army held this position. How could the stormtroopers fulfill his grandiose ambitions and create a new empire in the East? They could beat people up on the streets or in beer halls, but they could never win a war. Not just that, but Hindenburg and others in the nationalist elite were increasingly concerned about the lawlessness of the stormtroopers. So Hitler took dramatic action. On the 30th of June 1934, he personally arrested Röhm and the stormtrooper leaders, plus others who had, he felt, opposed his plans, and he had them shot out of hand. No one knows exactly how many were murdered in what became known as the Night of the Long Knives, but it's likely to have been over 100 people. Yet this lawless act was once again greeted with widespread approval. It appeared to millions of Germans to demonstrate how Hitler was prepared to use violence against his own violent supporters in order to create a more peaceful Germany. The army in particular was grateful to Hitler for suppressing the power of the stormtroopers, and shortly afterwards, on Hindenburg's death, was prepared to swear an oath of personal loyalty to Hitler, who in the summer of 1934 became not Chancellor, but Führer of the German people. No longer could the head of state dismiss him. He was the head of state. Assessing how Germans felt about living in this new Germany is extremely difficult. In part, that's because the Germans' right to free speech, a free press, and the rule of law had all been destroyed, so there was no freedom of expression. But there's another reason why estimating the percentage of Germans who supported the Nazis is problematic. That's because it was possible for Germans to be hugely supportive of some aspects of Nazi policy and yet dislike others. Take, for example, reaction to Hitler's decision in 1936 to move troops into the Rhineland, the part of Germany that had been demilitarized as a result of the Versailles Treaty. This action was hugely welcomed. But equally, many of those same Germans could be critical about the excesses of some Nazi leaders or problems of the economic situation. However, it's true to say, I think, that overall many Germans would have agreed with the views of Erna Kranz, a Bavarian woman I met 30 years ago who had been a teenager in the 1930s under the Nazis. I only know about that time
from our personal situation as a household. It got better. You saw the unemployed disappearing from the streets. They started the construction of the motorways, and all that provided work and took people off the streets.
She even went as far as to say, "I thought it was a good time. I liked it."
We weren't living in affluence like today, but there was order and discipline. People had the conceit to say that a German is special, that the German people should become a thoroughbred people, should stand above the others. An elite race was being promoted. Well, I have to say it was somewhat contagious. You used to say that if you tell a young person every day you are something special, then in the end they will believe you.
Those were the views of Erna Kranz. And as I say, I'm certain she spoke for millions of other Germans at the time. But the consequences of the Nazis saying to one group of Germans that they were something special, whilst simultaneously saying to another group of Germans that they were dangerous and not wanted in the country, would be disastrous, as we shall see in the next episode.